This paper is interested in how we understand pluralism in participatory design, and specifically how we draw the boundaries within it. It is a conceptual paper and quite theoretical, but with the intention of influencing participatory design practice by opening up how we approach the concept of plurality. The work is part of my AHRC-funded PhD research, which is looking at how people can be supported to use design to reclaim participation. Christopher Kelty reflects that participation is often reduced to a formatted procedure of consensus building. Agonistic and autonomous models of pluralism confront this understanding by shifting participation away from building consensus towards managing dissensus. In recent years, participatory design has begun drawing on these agonistic and autonomous models of pluralism to inform its own practices. Agonistic pluralism is a theory of democracy that emphasizes the positive aspects of conflict within politics. Mouffe and Leclau assert that while in politics the multiplicity of conflicting perspectives can never be completely reconciled, new hegemonic articulations which express shared ethico-political values of equality and social justice can establish a frontier between the people and the oligarchy in ways that bring together manifold struggles against oppression. To establish such a frontier, existing articulations of the oppressed must be destabilized and rearticulated in ways which collectively differentiate them from the oppressor. This rearticulation is expressed through the adoption of shared signifiers which only possess meaning because they articulate difference. Therefore, in agonistic pluralism, boundaries of participation are established through symbolic exclusion, where differences are articulated through the establishment of collective representation. Mouffe has proposed that design has a role to play in rearticulating existing collective representations towards new hegemonies. Participatory designers have understood collective representations as things, or the assemblies, rituals, and places where disputes are dealt with and political decisions are made. New hegemonies are created by rearticulating these things to establish new boundaries between the people and their oppressor in ways that bring together diverse struggles against subjugation. From Carl de Salvo, examples of rearticulation include reorienting the representation of digital information to expose and document the dominant forces which influence society, reconfiguring dominant characteristics in society through a critique of anthropomorphized robotics, and rearticulating social relationships through new technology which prompts us to move away from the individual toward the collective. Autonomous pluralism is the capability to live according to autonomous world-making practices. Arturo Escobar developed the theory by drawing on the Latin American concept of autonomía, or the cultural, ecological, and political process that involves autonomous forms of existence and decision-making. Escobar observes autonomía in the types of relational and autopoietic systems found in Latin American indigenous communities. Chilean biologists Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela explain how autopoietic systems can produce and maintain themselves through the creation of their own parts. As such, they are operationally closed, having sufficient processes within themselves to maintain their whole. From this, Escobar envisages the possibilities of creating a world of many worlds, where each can produce and maintain itself through the creation of its own parts. These worlds are not in contestation with each other, as in agonistic pluralism, but rather are autonomous from each other. Escobar defines this autonomy in terms of territory, which he understands to possess meaning which is best interpreted using local epistemologies built up over generations. Therefore, in autonomous pluralism, boundaries of participation are established through symbolic exclusion determined by shared articulations of territory. Escobar draws parallels between autonomía and ontological design, which asserts that as we design the world, it acts back on us. As such, we should aim to design things that act back on us in sustaining ways. For Escobar, such sustainment is best achieved at the local level, where every community can practice the design of itself with dignity. This is particularly meaningful for participatory designers working in the global south, where design approaches originating from the industrial practices of the global north often fail to grasp alternative ways of designing. Attempts to decolonize practices have led designers to develop onto epistemic approaches to participatory design, where local capability and knowledge provide the foundations for design collaborations. Autonomia provides a way for designers within and beyond the global south to support participation in non-hegemonic ways of being. Agonistic and autonomous models of pluralism express shared ethico-political values among some people by establishing a representational boundary with others. Absurdist philosopher Albert Camus explains, however, that most attempts to articulate togetherness through representation, whether they be attached to a god, a king, a place, or a worldview, end in violence. Escobar himself notes that, in their search for autonomy, some slide back into developmentalism, others are subverted from within by their own leaders, still others reinscribe older forms of oppression or create new ones. Similarly, Mouffe admits that the populist moment generated by agonistic action may open the way for authoritarian solutions. Further, within participatory design, both agonistic and autonomous practitioners have reflected that what began as action shaped by morality becomes action shaped by representation, of labs, of budgets, of universities, of partners, of citizens, cities, and nations. To mitigate the risk of descending into totality, this paper turns to the absurdist philosophy of Albert Camus. Camus' ultimate concern is man's failure to deal with the creeping realization that their desire to find absolute meaning in the world will ultimately be unfulfilled. Solidarity for Camus is therefore not about asserting or protecting some shared meaning. Rather, solidarity is brought about by acknowledging the collective experience of lacking a shared meaning or a lack of collective representation. Such a collective experience can ultimately be unfulfilling, frustrating, and violent. Camus argues, however, that individuals must work to dispute the extent of this violence by setting limits on freedoms. These limits emerge through a series of rebellious acts where each individual action approximates a new limit. As Camus states, I rebel, therefore we exist, which is to say, I acknowledge that we share the experience of existing without any absolute meaning, and I want to make the suffering that this causes more tolerable by working together to set appropriate limits on our individual freedom. Through rebellion, moral rather than representational logic bound participation by continually redefining the limits of individual freedom within a collective. Design has yet to draw directly on Camus' conceptualization of rebellion. However, other design practices have affinities with his absurdist thinking. For example, the critical design practices described by Matt Malpass frequently work to reveal the portrayal of moral logic underlying the assertions of truth embedded within existing or emerging representation. Malpass, however, doesn't necessarily see these rebellious design practices as moments of solidarity in the way Camus might describe them. Rather, he considers them to be examples of a top-down practice where the user is seen as a reactive participant. Therefore, for him, critical design is distinct from more participatory social design practices which view people as active participants in a critical inquiry. However, rebellious design is frequently performed by non-designers. For example, punk's subversion of tartan, suffragettes' vandalism of pennies, and the Barbie liberation organization's hacked dolls. Further, people frequently offer up alternative performances to those scripted by designed things, including children who queer Barbie or subvert the idealized storylines offered by toy manufacturers. Such examples imply an innate capability among people to rebel through the practice of design. With this in mind, designers might create absurd infrastructures akin to the participatory agonistic infrastructures developed in response to Mouffe and McClough. However, rather than supporting the articulation of difference through the development of collective representations, absurd infrastructures would work to reveal solidarity in absurdity by supporting rebellious acts which reveal the moral logic submerged beneath collective representations. At a theoretical level, absurdism brings a new starting point for participatory design to consider pluralist action. At its core, this means rejecting a logic of action based on representation and instead adopting a logic of action based on morality. While Camus notes that new assertions of absolute representations are frequently made in moments of rebellion, what is important is that such rebellions are kept accountable to their original moral logic. As such, the role of rebellion is not to articulate difference in moments of mobilization, but to continuously articulate absurdity, and thereby maintain the visibility of our true solidarity in the negotiation of moral boundaries. In practice, adopting absurdist pluralism in participatory design would mean supporting people to negotiate the freedoms of their participation by articulating the absurdity of collective representation. Such an approach would seek to shift the focus away from any constructed sense of a collective and rather work with individuals to realize their solidarity in absurdity by designing against felt injustice.